Hello, am I back? Should be back now, hopefully. But it's all good now. So, yep, I cycled for a minute real quick. What was going on? But we're back. So, is everyone able to hear and see me? Nothing got screwed up, because it could easily get screwed up just for that. So just let me know if something went wrong. Martin, are you about to start streaming? It looks like I would assume you are. It looks like it. Or you might already be. Let's take a look. Is Martin streaming now? Not yet. Doesn't look like it, but probably soon. Okie dokie. So, let's get to it.
Listen, all this takes a lot of getting used to.
It's a lot louder than I expected.
And you do get used to it after a while.
Okay.
There's three things I always miss, though. One, not having to watch my step all the time. Two,
I don't know if that changes it for you guys, but that was pretty loud for me.
and three,
Alright,
I miss the songs. Folks from Ceylon knew how to
let's
carry
see.
Sure, we've got some songs.
I want to figure out why right key doesn't work first.
But try and imagine what they sounded like. Playing to a room full of fine people. Unwinding at the soul regret after a hard day's work. Those were the days.
All of the complex seek stuff is just totally busted, which is fine. Here it is, move right. Yeah, move right's been scalpeled out. Let's figure out why that would be. No, it's not a trailer. It's I don't know why the OST starts with a voiceover, but it does. But it's the Bastion soundtrack. I never played the game, but somebody recommended the soundtrack to me at one point, and I liked it, so I listened to it a few times. And it was on my list of recommendations, so I just put it on. Let's see. This move right has been removed, and that's because it relies on the size of the buffer. So you can't just increase the position. You can't just get the size and expect it to work. But what I can do is compute a size a different way. I can say that I want the size of gap buffer size, I believe, is a thing I have. Which just computes the size of the buffer for me. So that should make right work again. Cool, so basic navigation is back. But we don't have seeking left and right and up and down, and there's a bug with down, like when I'm on the first character of a line, it's messed up. Which is interesting. Which that's probably a seek problem, and I want to first see if that seek problem also exists in the golden array version, because right now I'm on this line. I'll show you what I do. I go to this line here, and then I hit down, and it puts me at the end of the line rather than at the beginning of the next line, which is what it should do. Anywhere else in the line, I press down and it works, but right here it stops working. So that's a seek problem. And I want to see if that exists with both versions or just the gap buffer. This is where things start to get tricky because the way I get the size is different between the two. And I don't just want to name them, like, I could just set up like a thing where I have overridden functions that I switch between, but I don't really want to do, well actually, if they were overridden, it wouldn't be a problem later when the thing I don't want to have is like name conflicts, which I'm worried would happen if I tried to give everything the same name. Like if I made a buffer size for gap buffers and a buffer size for golden array buffers, I'm afraid I would have name conflicts, but right there I could actually override them and it would be fine. Maybe I could just do overridden functions and it would be fine. I should try that later. So like I said, the seek is pretty similar now too, so I could make it even easier on myself to switch back and forth. Okay, down works here, so that's good. That means it's just a problem with how I'm doing my iteration in the gap buffer. Wait, before I do that, let me pop this open and turn the scalpel back to gap buffer. Alright, why are you wrong? What's wrong with you? Oh, you know, I guess it could be because the hinting is better for... Okay, so this is a problem with the hinting. The fact that I have hinting on the golden array means that the cursor seek doesn't necessarily work on the golden array. It only works as long as the hint is on the right line. So actually, let me turn this back on. So I have the golden array. Let me switch over to the golden array, and I'll set up its make cursor hint to do the beginning of file instead of the beginning of the line. Hello, Splinty. So that's kind of interesting. That means that we'll just get hints from the beginning of the file every time. And let's see if it's busted there. It is, hahaha. So my theory was correct. The only reason that it works on golden array and not gap buffer is because the hint gets it past that end of the line that it messes up on. So it seems like if I'm searching for this position here, and I'm doing it by pressing down, for some reason it gets there and then decides to pick this one or something like this. So let's make Visual Studio paint the wrong, forget to paint itself a bunch, because that's a bit of fun. And then when we're done with that, let's put our cursor right at the beginning and get ready to test this. So, file view, no, main one, move down. There it is. Put a breakpoint. Down. Okay. Preferred X, cursor Y. That's where we're trying to go. Seek to there, please. Boom. It says, alright, let me look and see if my lines are wrapped. They are unwrapped, so I will do an unwrapped seek on 0 and 17, and I'm not going to round it down. Okay. And so he says, I'm seeking to 0, 17 without rounding down. Okay. Cursor from unwrapped XY. Okay, this is the buffer version, and here's where it's gonna make it's gonna do some work there and then ignore that. Whoops, don't edit. It's doing some work there, and then it's going to ignore that work and make a hint at the beginning of the file for my testing purposes. And then it's gonna do cursor seek. Well, first it's gotta figure out the seek type. Okay, now it's doing a cursor seek on this buffer. Okay, so, this cursor we're looking at from the start has a position of 0, very good. So the first CH is a slash. Great. So I'm going to keep my eye on data the whole time. And then it seeks into this first step and says, is this satisfied by my seek yet? Is it satisfying the seek? And it goes, does some work, and boom, and now the cursor is where? After all of that, the cursor is in the next position. Buffered data. You mean right here? On line Splinty, are you asking me about line 432? Alright, so it's going to not to the end of the file yet. Not sure if it wants to get out. The arrow symbol there means that buffer is a pointer, right? So buffer is a struct, right? And I can look at right here. It says like, here's a struct, and it's either a struct or a class, that is. And if I don't have a pointer to it, you use the dot. But if the type you have is a pointer to that struct, you have to use the arrow. It's a pretty dumb feature that was originally in C. For some reason, they thought you wouldn't want to confuse actual structs with pointers to structs. So to differentiate them, you do a dot if you don't have a pointer, and you do an arrow if you do have a pointer. But they're not really any different. Like it's so silly to the point where the compiler can look at this, and if you have the wrong one, like if it looks and says, "Oh, that arrow should be a dot," it can give you an arrow that says, "Arrow left of arrow must be pointer. Did you mean dot?" Like it knows that what you meant to put there was a dot, and it just says, "Did you mean dot?" because that's the only thing that would have made sense. And so the compiler has all the information it needs to decode this as a dot. If you wanted to, it just won't. So it's like a weird little feature of C and C++ that if this is a pointer, you do a dot here with an arrow instead of a dot. That's really all there is to it. Alright. Y is not greater than seek. Ooh, Y is not even greater than that, so that shouldn't trigger yet. Y is greater than seek. Y would become greater than Alright, I'm starting to predict where I think this is going to go wrong, but we're going to follow it through. So each of these steps, it's just right there, it's computed the next cursor position. You see it's still on the same line, so it shouldn't end this time either because the Y is not far enough down to finish the seek. Next time through, it finds a new line, so that means it has incremented its Y position variables, and it clears its X position variables back to 0 because it's now at the beginning of the line. It increments the cursor position to the next position in the file. Does it really set character to 0? It should be setting character to 1 there. Okay, so line 160 needs a change. Because that's just downright wrong. Grab the X1. I'm not sure why I'm yawning. I had plenty of sleep last night. Oh well. XY seek. That's good. Okay, so now this is at a 17, this is a 0, so this part is true. X is 0. Okay, so this is going to trigger. Yes, we go into there. Are we rounding down? We are not rounding down. Then the next question is this ooh. So that becomes a negative because the previous X was large and seek X is 0. Okay, so this right here is a line that assumes that you're on the same line. And if you've just done a new line, this doesn't make any sense. Because if you've just done a new line, you want to ignore this. Which is actually not a hard problem to solve because now that the only new line character is /n, I can just is line feed, I should say. I can just test the value of ch to say if all of this is true and ch is not a new line, then do this. Because if it is a new line, we want to just ignore this line. Okay. So that gives us that bug fix. And the other thing I wanted to do was visit up here and say that characters should start off at 1 at the beginning of a line. Canoogles, did you get a chance to play with that LC2K assembler? There we go. Now down is working. Okay, so everything's back to working. With without the hints being set up correctly, it still works, so that's good news. So I can go ahead and set the golden array to use its hints correctly again. Okay. Let's make sure it works with the correct hints. Alright, very good. So now it's not seeking from the beginning of the file, it seeks just from the beginning of each line, so that's much better. And the seek also works if you do have to do multi-line seek, so if I ever want to change how I do my hints, on like kilobyte-sized pages or something like that, I can do it now. That's a good plan. That's a pretty good plan. I'm curious as to know, is it school or something else that has prevented you from remaining firmly on your plan, on that plan? Oh, I see. Gotcha. Right. Job. I remember you had something that came up. Just couldn't remember what it was. I don't know how old you are, so couldn't extrapolate from that. Okay, so let's get to the gap buffer now. Its cursor seek is working all great. So I think something that would be interesting to fix is this issue. I said I could try doing an overloaded function for that, so that when I switch which type I'm compiling here, it just works. So I'm going to try that. So this right here shouldn't compile on either end right now. But I could say that the gap buffer size is just named buffer size, and then that one would work. Unless I'm compiling without maybe I'm doing. Oh, gotcha. Okay. Well, let me visit golden array real quick and break it, and then Emacs that is, and then do a quick size function on this side. Ta-da! There we go. Scrolling's working. Positioning is all working. Everybody works. Okay. Now, let me finally switch back to the gap buffer for reals. There we go. Yes, everybody seems to be working here, except for scrolling, and the long-range seeking doesn't work. Alright. I want to work on the seeking. I want to be able to do long-range seeking to white space, alphanumeric. I can't do tokens because I don't have a lecture for a gap buffer. So I won't seek to tokens yet, but I can seek to those other things and seek up and down to empty lines. That seems like a good plan. So the question is, what sort of primitives do I just want to provide those as primitives, or what? Right? What do I need to do? So let's start from move right. Wait. Seek white space is above moving. It's a little weird. Right, so what I basically had for primitives before was a seek white space, which I could move into the buffer level as an overloaded function. And then you would just tell it what kind of buffer you have. You would give it your buffer and your position, and it would figure out how to do the seek and return to you the position you wanted. That seems like a good plan. So to make that happen, I'll once again return to the golden array version. That's a good deal. If you're having a good time with the stuff you're working on, that's good. So I'll go back to get golden array again, but for the purpose of making the right abstraction so that I can do it for the gap buffer. So here's where I have like a thing for counting new lines. That seems like the right kind of place for this, so I'm just gonna throw it in here. Internal seek white space right. You give it the buffer, you give it the position, sure. Kunigl asks, could you briefly explain what's a golden array? So, I can't remember where I got this name for golden array, but the golden array is what I'm calling my current scheme in 4coder. And basically, it's extremely complicated. So I'm gonna draw a picture of it in Mischief, right? So like, for example, if you have a gap buffer, that means you have a big chunk of memory and you have a gap somewhere in it, so that you have data here that you care about, text you care about, text here you care about, and a gap here to fill in, right? And if you have like Martin Cohen's multi-gap buffer or fixed width gap buffer, whatever he likes to call it, what you have is a bunch of small buffers, a bunch of small data chunks like so, that are all about 4 kilobytes, so, you know, small in that sense. And each one has a small gap in it, right? And the text of your file is on the edges of each gap, right? So your gaps can be anywhere, and it's just each one of these chunks is the same size. So here you have some text you care about, here you have text you care about, etc. And the goal of all of these is to find ways to set up an array or a buffer so that you can insert stuff into it quickly, right? Because if I'm in this section of the code and I insert here, then all I have to do to make that happen in this scheme is move some of this code over here, move some of the text, and then insert a new character there. And then the only time you have to do hard work is if this gets completely full so that you have no gap left, and then you have to make a new fixed width gap buffer, or fixed width like chunk. The gap up here is pretty similar. If I want to insert like right here, all that happens is everything after that gets moved over here, and you insert a character there, right? So that's how gap buffers work, and ropes are even more complicated. But the idea is just figure out how to insert stuff. So, as I said, a golden array is very complicated. What happens in a golden array is you have a chunk of data, and you put all of the text in it, and there's no fucking gap. I'm sorry, I just got upset there because it's so much easier. Everything gets so much harder with the gaps. Like, I've been trying to figure out how to do gaps for so long. There's just no gap. And then when you insert a character, you just take all of this and you shift it over one character, right? You shift everything over just one character and insert a character there. So that's how a golden array works. It's very complicated. It's very difficult, and the reason it's so difficult is because everything is going to be slow no matter what you do. You can't win. The upside is that everything else you do is very easy, except for like the actual text manipulation. And like every algorithm in the world that deals with a file wants its file that way, like lexing a file, blah blah blah. But you just can't edit it. You can't edit it as a golden array. So I called it golden because it's like it's a good old just array that just doesn't do anything fancy at all. Okay. So seeking to the right. To do it in this one, what I need is a data and a size. I grab that out of the buffer. Yeah, Canucles, I agree. I didn't think to do anything fancy for a while because it continued to be good enough. And people always ask me, are you doing a gap buffer, or how do you organize the text? How is this possible? Like, what is your trick? And I'm like, it's just an array. It's just a good old array. And then one time I said golden instead of good old. Yeah, it's just so much easier. It takes off a lot. Like, there's basically no thinking. Until you start trying to do like a 10 megabyte file and seek to the right position quickly, and then you have to do the hinting data. If you're doing absolute positions, if you did relative positions with golden array, you'd be like there's no work to do there. You just do inserts and that's it. But at some point I have to tackle all this gap stuff. Martin says that gap buffers are totally simple, but you know, I'm not sure I can agree yet. I mean, a single gap buffer hasn't been too hard yet. It's sort of plugging into my system nicely, but that's because I did some work last week to abstract everything so that it would be ready for this. So, hard to say. I've spent enough months on a golden array to know how I really want to abstract it for other types. Alright, so, no, I have the buffer separated from the document. I call it a file, but I mean, I'm not sure. Are you talking about like the hinting data that I associate with the buffer? Instead of with the document? Yeah. So what I post on I'll show you how all of this works. So what I'm posting is just my buffer structure. If I go to the file view, that's where I keep the editing file, which contains the buffer that it uses, as well as everything else that it needs. And then on top of that, there's a file view, which views one editing file. So there's several areas of separation there, because the file, for example, doesn't know about the panel that it's in. It doesn't know how much space it has for rendering. Therefore, the view is actually the one that keeps track of the Y positions of everything, for example. The file keeps track of like when things are saved and stuff like that. Yeah, so all of the line metadata goes in here with the buffer. And maybe that's a mistake, but I don't know. Like, I only want one. This metadata is true no matter which view the buffer is in. If the buffer is in two places, that's the same data everywhere. So maybe if you have a suggestion, I could see a world where the line metadata wants to be separated, but I don't see why I would do that. Because this metadata is like tied, it's directly tied to the data in the buffer. As in, like, there's no other metadata that could go there given the data in that buffer. Yeah, I see what you mean. Like, if I was making a new buffer type, I wouldn't have to do all of this again. But that's not necessarily going to be the same for every buffer type. Like, if I do a fixed width gap buffer, which I plan to do, this will probably be totally different. Because I want to optimize it differently for different cases. And in addition to that, the way you have to do that is different. I guess the main difference is you have a getText function, which I guess you use to stringify one portion of your buffer, no matter how it's organized. You stringify like that portion as just concatenated text, and then you operate on that text there. But I'd prefer to do my operations on the buffer inline. Like the seek I'm about to do would be much easier if I just said I was going to stringify a chunk of text and seek through it. And if I didn't find what I'm looking for, so stringify the next chunk of text and seek through that. Then I would write one seek that would just go to the stringify function and then do the seek on that stringified result. So, I'm not sure that I want to implement everything that way. I mean, I could, and that'd be a nice way to abstract it so that they all just sort of work one way and I just have to implement the very basics. But I'm going to probably do too much work on this because I want to see what's like the best that I can do on each one. Which maybe is crazy because that's like a lot of things you have to do on each one. Yeah, I could think. I do have a stringify, which I use for like when I undo and copy paste and stuff. Use this stringify to get the strings and pass it on to those systems that need concatenated text. But like the cursor seek, for example, I don't want to stringify and seek on that and then convert back to the buffer. It seems like easier to just do it in the buffer space. However the buffer wants it. Try to get the seek to work inside its space. And it just turns out the gap buffer is very similar to the golden array in most ways. The metadata I'm talking about with Martin is the starting position of each line, so I know which, because not all lines are the same length, so I know where each line starts, like the index into the file I have to go to find the start of the fifth line, for example. The width of that line when you render it, so when you render that line just straight across, what is the sum x of this, like the sum x value, the sum of the x values of all the characters in that line. And then in the view, what is the y value of each line if I'm wrapping lines? Yeah, I could see, like, I have a stringify, which is what I was calling it down here, which I was going to implement for all of them. I just didn't want to implement everything through stringifying it and then operating on it. Like, the seek I'm about to do could just be a matter of write once, a way of doing a seek by stringify a chunk and seek on that, and stringify a chunk and seek on that. But I don't want to implement everything through that. Just the things that absolutely can't be like rewritten tons of times. Like my lexer will probably use stringify by stringifying pages and lexing and then blah blah blah. But There's certain things I want to try to optimize for the structure they're in rather than doing it that way. Which maybe is too much. But I feel like, I don't know, I think that at some point I wouldn't get a fair read on, like, you know, maybe you can do much better with this type over that type if you optimize it rather than pushing them all through like stringify. Because once you stringify things and operate on the strings, they're all going to have very similar characteristics. It's only a matter of how fast do they stringify something. And maybe something stringifies slowly, but if you hadn't tried to stringify it, there's a fast way to do the thing you were trying to do. I don't know. Certainly is more work. I can agree with you there. Anyway, seeking to the right. So char is white space. I need to figure out a way to deal with that situation. Yeah, I have the ability to stringify and work through it that way. That's just not the way I do everything. Like cursor seeking, for example, I don't think would be optimized very well if I did it that way. Then again, I am just looping over the characters out of the buffer. I don't know, I just don't like the idea of first writing out a buffer of text and then reading it to do something that I almost trivially could have done in place. I am not really opposed to things that involve writing something out, data out, and then reading that data, but I'm trying to probably do more than I should without that. I'm watching what you're saying. I know what you're saying. So you're saying that you have a stringify and you have a read, and I have a read too. That's this one right here. It's the stringify loop. I don't tend to use callbacks. I don't tend to use callbacks for the same thing you're discussing, which is fine. Like I just don't understand, I guess, what how that's important. Like I don't understand which thing you think would be easier for me. I think the main difference is that I'm not using those abstraction layers as often as you are, which does mean I have a lot more work to do. I can agree with you there. Okay, let's see. I just don't totally understand what it is that what you're suggesting, I guess. Like, I don't see what advantage, for example, I would get for not putting the metadata in the buffer text stuff. Alright. So like this, for example, if I did this in terms of reading from the buffer, might be easier, but it's so much faster for certain cases not to do that. So it's tough for me to say. Why would the second one be greater than or equal to 0? Why would I want to go to -1? Oh, I do a plus at the end there. That's interesting. Right, yeah, it is a bit hard to get a full grasp for everything I'm doing. That's true. That's true. I'll have to show you how I. Do you have a minute, Martin? I'll show you how I do stuff. One thing that I do that's weird is I know I can never do a callback. Which is a habit I picked up a long time ago. Like, the only time I ever did callbacks was in Lua, and I thought they were awesome there. But like in C, I just never do a callback. I invert the callback in a weird way. So, basically, instead of having a thing where you have a function that runs and calls, you normally with a callback, what you do is you have a function that runs and like, oh, you want to read data out of your buffer. So whenever that function needs more data from the buffer, it does, oh, read more stuff, calls the callback, and the callback gives back data, right? So you have like a thing where I call some function and I tell that function, here's my buffer that I want you to deal with through a callback, and then it says I need data from the buffer. It calls into the buffer to get that data, or it calls into the callback to get that data. What I have set up usually is a loop that every instance of the loop, you can like iterate through the loop, and every time you do another step of the loop, it gives you the next read, and then you take that data, and the body of the loop is whatever thing you would have done with the data. And it might sound like it's not at all equivalent, but you can pretty much, like, I don't know, every time I see something done with a callback, I find it more confusing or like harder to deal with than just doing it this way. So like, this is my equivalent interface, I think. There might be downsides to that you're thinking of. Yeah, it's sort of streaming versus callback interface, or callback, chunk callback. That's a pretty good way to say the difference that I'm talking about. So I don't actually have a read callback, which maybe is important, and you can explain why when I'm on your stream later. Alright, so I grab the data, and I don't really want those on a separate line if I don't have to have them there, but I think I do. It's long enough. Alright, now the trick is char is white space, and the reason that's a trick is because that won't be in the public one unless I put it there, which I guess I can do, or I can just implement my own in the shared version, which I think is probably better for now. And the only reason I prefer not to put it in the public section is because it's tied up with my string stuff, which is, first of all, not very good. It's not ready for me to share yet, and it's more of a library, and also because that's a reward for backers, so. Interesting. Character C. Seek white space, right. Right, okay, that I remember. So, result, return results. Yeah, so that is true. I am doing seek white space left and seek white space right for each buffer type, and I'm agreeing with you that I wouldn't have as much work to do if I would do that via this interface where I stringify it first, either streaming it or get the equivalent, like just get stringifying a chunk. So this one right here basically uses the stream to stringify one chunk, and this stream up here is for looping and doing work. And I could write once the thing that does the loop and seeks across the results of the loop, and that would mean that I write it once and it works on all buffer types. Buffer stringify writes its results into that buffer, into the out buffer. No, but the point of Martin, the point of stringify is to give me a chunk of data that's all concatenated so that I can like store it for undo and redo and stuff. That's when I need the data to not have gaps anymore. And this up here is the thing that returns a pointer to the data chunk and has a size associated with it, right? So when you're doing the top part, that does a loop, and each step of the loop, it returns a pointer to the data. It returns a pointer to the data and the size of that chunk, and then once you're done with reading through that chunk, you call next, and you get the next chunk, and you read through that one. So that's the streaming right there. And then this is like your get text that uses the streaming to stringify into one chunk to eliminate gaps. And the only difference between you and me is that you have thought to use these to implement everything, and I have not. And maybe yours idea is better. I can admit that much. I can admit that I'm not using those to implement everything and use that one thing everywhere, and that might be better. Especially given that I wouldn't have to do this for here and the gap buffer separately. Because I definitely could, now that you mention it. Like, what I would do is take the current position, and if I'm seeking to the right, for example, grab a kilobyte of, or just start streaming, and do this logic with data position being a character each time. Interesting. I'm going to try that. That's fun. I like that idea. So I'm going to do what I originally planned to do, and then I'm going to try to do the one function that does both. Because that sounds like a fun challenge that maybe I should actually think about. Right. So go back to shared. We'll call you is white space. And you guys over here will use is white space. Okay. Alright, so this stuff can go. And then this stuff here becomes buffer seek white space right. And I just pass in the buffer and the cursor position. So alright, let's see, that needs to be buffer seek white space right. This one needs to be seek white space left. You don't want the data, you want the whole buffer. Alright. So that should just be fine. That's pretty much exactly the same thing still. Brilliant. Now what I need to do is tell the command map to stop using the token version and just do seek white right, seek white left, space, space. There we go. And the reason for that is because the gap buffer won't really handle the token version very well. So I'm going to finish what my original idea was, and then I'm going to compare that to the idea that Martin has put forward for me. That would also apply to count new lines right here. In fact, that would apply to a lot of things. That would apply to rendering too. You would just stream in characters, and then your only concern is how quick is the stream, and they all work the same way. It's very interesting. Okay. Thank you, Martin. By the way. Gap buffer. Alright, so for this one to work, we take, okay, what do I gotta do? I gotta say, right, Canucles is, I'm not sure what you're asking, what you mean by the 32 and 64-bit systems. Are you asking, once the struct becomes bigger than a pointer, pass the struct by its pointer? I wasn't asking you anything, Martin. I'm trying to figure out what Canucles is asking. I mean, Are you asking, like, in a 32-bit system and a 64-bit system, those are the sizes of the pointers, and that is what he's talking about in terms of the size of a pointer. Is how many bytes the point it takes to store a pointer. Alright, so what do I do for a gap buffer here? It's a little weird. I start with a position, and wow, this is actually going to be kind of messy. I'm somewhat tempted to just skip this step now that I'm looking at it and try to write up the stream. Canucles, yeah, that's exactly what it means. So the logic is pretty confusing because the position isn't even the data position. So the question is, like, at each step, if position ever hits size 1, you want to add in. Okay. I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to do the stream version. Yeah, Martin agrees. What I'm looking at now is actually a really gross problem that the stream is a nice way to actually handle. So we're going to take the code over here on the left and make it work as a stream now. Okay, so to do that, let me put up golden array on this side. And what I want is like another shared thing for like post shared, because this stuff here would really be shared. Like, I don't want to copy this over, but it also has to come after the include, not before the include. So I need another shared, but first I'll write it for the golden array and make it work. Great. Okay. So seeking right, what does that look like when I stream it? Yeah, this works out really nice, doesn't it? Because what I get back is basically a 0 base, so I just need to add in the position I was at all times to make it right. Offset. And of course, you could do some really crazy stuff to make that add up without the extra additions that I might play with. um, we'll play with later, that is. So then the next thing I need to do is just a matter of, now that I've got it, I look at the loop data, and I say, hey, loop data, what do you think about this position? And it goes, oh, that position, what about it? And I say, is it white space? And then I say also, by the way, wait, data position plus 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 position, right. The only tricky thing is, kind of interesting, is that, that's gonna work out too. What is the right way to do this? Get the chunk. Once you've got it, shift it so that size becomes the end position. And this is even better than what I was planning to do. Okay, so that's nuts. And then at each position along the way, wait, do I care? I might need to preserve those actually. So what I should do is have an end and a local data that I can screw around with. So end will actually equal that, data will equal that, while position is less than the end. And then stage equals 0, and there is white space at data position, then increment my position, else if stage equals 1 and there is not white space, increment my position, actually, this is where it gets interesting, because there's so many fun ways to optimize that. What I'd love to do is still have two separate loops. Can I pull that off? I would have to say that you happen here once, and then I say that this whole loop here, I do that, I go until I'm at the end, and while position is less than the end, and it is white space, you just keep moving the position forward. Now if it gets to the end, that's either the end of the whole file or the end of the stream. And the difference is, if it's the end of the stream, the outer loop will end too. Whereas if it's the end of the chunk, it will go out and get more and keep going. Now, if I get to the end of, if I have a situation where data position isn't white space, is not white space, then that means I want to get out of this loop and go on to the next one. So to make that happen, I want to say when I get out of there, if we do not have white space at the current position, then break out entirely and continue from here, where it will initially use the same, it'll keep from exactly where it left off. Yeah, this is pretty cool. And then boom. So to do 2 loops in a row is a little bit nasty, but not terrible. And I think that will work. I'm going to take a short bathroom break, and then I'll be back. Thank you, Martin, for setting me straight. Mr. Miyagi, yeah, you can't, if you have a pointer and you're in 64-bit, that pointer is 64 bits wide. You can't ask for a 32-bit pointer. What you can do, and what I often do, is I don't store pointers for my referencing to other things. I store indexes, and I keep like an array. So like if I have a chunk of data that I know I don't need 64 bits or even 32 bits worth of indexing on, right? Like it's 4 kilobytes, so 16 bits is enough to index this whole chunk of data. I'll store one pointer to the base of that, and then I'll store my 16-bit integers or my 32-bit integers or whatever to actually index into that pointer, and so I sort of ignore the pointer's actual size that way. And the other nice thing about that is if you do that, then you are pretty much set up to serialize your data in a much more easy way. If you try to serialize something that contains pointers, it's a nightmare. Yeah, I'm using a C++ compiler, and I have a few operator overloadings and I use some things which are technically C++ here and there, but mostly I stick to a C style, where I just use public variables, and I don't have methods, I don't have constructors and destructors, etc. I don't know if it was a good idea or not. I don't really have an opinion on whether it's better to do C++ or C Sharp. I would say if you're doing better in C++ or you feel more comfortable, then it's definitely a good idea. You should program in the language that lets you get things done first and foremost. Like if you just can't get something done in C Sharp, then leaving is fine. Similarly, if you can't get something done in a C style, then you either have to stop programming or do some other type of programming, right? So if you have trouble with one, it's always good to try something else. I didn't always program this way. I tried all sorts of stuff, and before I discovered that this was how I was able to get things done. But that's not to say that anyone who programs any language can do just about anything that anyone else can do. The thing you're good at will determine which sorts of things you can do. That is true. So if there was something that you absolutely wanted to be able to do and it requires you to do C++, then it wouldn't matter what you're good at. You'd have to do C++, right? So you either go with what you're good at, you go with what you want to do, or if you're lucky, you do both. I'm trying to pick some music real quick before we get back to work. What should I do? Well, I have this in my search. Maybe this would be fun. This will be fun for me. I don't know if it's good background. Someone suggested good background music. I think, in my opinion, C is a much easier language to learn than other things. It's hard to become, the thing with C is it's hard to become the best in the world at C because there's so much to, like, it's not that there's much to learn, but there's so much room to grow in C. But C itself isn't that hard to learn. C is a fairly simple language. It's just getting used to the raw power of it and fully leveraging it is much more difficult than other languages. C Sharp, I think, is harder to learn. I tried to learn C Sharp at one point, and I found it harder to learn. And people say once you've got it, it's nice because it's got high-level stuff and everything. But there's a sort of a lower ceiling too. Like C Sharp might be harder to learn, but it's also hard. Like there's a lower ceiling on how good you can do. Where if you learn C, it's easy to get in, and it's easy to get in and do bad programming, and then there's a large ceiling you can spend forever trying to get to the best you can do in C. In my opinion, it's true that C Sharp is harder to learn. But that's like my personal the way I'm wired to make that particularly true. But I think it's easier to get into C. I do. There's just less things to it. There's less different things to learn about C. Now there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot more learning to do in C because there's a lot of room to grow, where C Sharp doesn't give you as much room to grow. So you can spend a much longer time learning C, but getting in the ground floor, I think, is easier in C. Did someone suggested a good background music soundtrack at one point, and if I don't hear what that was in the next minute, I'm gonna play what I have queued up and get back to the programming. Yeah, Canucles has the right idea. It's like C has a small alphabet, but there's a lot you can construct with it. And C sharp has a large alphabet that is hard to learn the whole alphabet in C sharp versus C, but once you have the whole alphabet, that's gets you much higher up the road, whereas in C you have to spend more time learning how to construct things with the simpler alphabet. Alright, I'll take a look at these. Thank you, Canucles. Is this good? Is this what you're looking for? Alright, so this kind of looks like it might work. Let's do the seeking left version. Now the interesting thing about this is I don't think I have backwards streaming, which is kind of what I'm going to need. Oh, if you have experience with Java, then yeah, C# is probably easier than C. C is a different mindset to some extent. Canucles, I have no idea what you're talking about. You're right. I'm completely confused by you. Alright, so we need a backwards stream, first of all. So to make that happen, I need you copied and pasted. We'll call this backstringify, or maybe just backify to make it shorter. Backify. I can remember that. Okay. And then I need my stringify loop, and I have down here, just pop you up here actually, stringify loop, and a backify loop. Alright, to backify something, what I'll need to do is say okay, so to backify a buffer, what am I going to specify? Up here I was specifying where I was and where I want it to end, which was at the end. So here I'm probably going to want to specify a start and an end, where the end is actually going to be less than the start, and a page size that way. Okay, so start isn't where the buffer starts, it's where the buffer ends. And we're going to start and move backwards through this. So here's the buffer. The data is not able to be set until the end. The size of something should be the start minus the end. And then we can set its page size up above and set U right there. And then the end would be the buffer data plus end. That's fine. So the point is, I need to make sure that the last thing I return is at least a buffer that points at end of size 1, like a chunk of that size, so that I get the last thing in there. That's the last thing that needs to come out at the farthest to the left, is end. The page size, here's the size of the thing. If I go over the page size, that's what I do. And then data is the start position minus the size, right? So I'm always just taking the start position where I am now, and I'm subtracting the size of the chunk that I have, whether that's the page size or all the way to the beginning. That's my data. That seems good. Hello, Effector. O/, or whatever. Canucos, I'm not going to track down specific tracks. I have to leave it running for like however long the music is. In this case, it looks like it's an hour long. Unless we decide we really don't like it. If everyone else here, if we all come into agreement that it's just no good. Alright. So that's fine. This Backify good looks fine. Okay, so Backify next. These actually all need to deal with Backifies, not stringifies. Okay. So I look at my data and I say, alright, if that data there is the end position, then we're done. Otherwise, look at the data and say, I'm going to subtract out one full page size. Oh, this is nice. Okay, so, and then, yeah, subtract out one full page size, and you say, okay, I just stepped back one full page. Either I went too far, either that's fine and my size stays what it was, like my size is still the page size. Well, yeah, my size is still the page size in this case. Or my size got too big. So if the size is greater, yeah, if that goes past the end, so here's the end and it goes past, and I want to pop up to there. Right, so it's like if loop data is less than loop end, then the loop size can be updated to reflect that, but I need to keep the old pointer in order to do that. So that's gotta happen. And sure, so there's the that, and then here is the this. Okay. So that should be a good backwards stream. Alright, so, let's write this backwards loop. So to do this one, well, let's see, probably want the same sort of kind of stuff. I don't really need that, actually, is waste. Alright, so it's the same sort of kind of stuff, except we're going to backify it instead of stringifying it. And that looks like that, which works out to be exactly the same, except that I want my end to be 0 since it's a backwards thing, but the size should still be the same. I don't really care about the page size with this one, so if I just set it to say as large as the buffer, I get the whole thing at once. And then I perform my loop, which will be something like the other one, but I'll be backifying good. Loop, there we go. Backify next, there we go. We'll need this twice. Alright, and then the question is, can we take something like this? Is pretty similar because it gives me my data position and I want to subtract out the, but I don't want to subtract out my position. That's where it gets a little weird. If I were to subtract out the position, I would actually make all of it go negative. I would have to use a negative index. And what I want to subtract out is just enough so that interesting. I'm not sure how to actually do this part. Because what I want is for data position to line up correctly. Right? And it seems like I definitely have to subtract apart from the data. I don't have to subtract apart from the data, but I'm not sure how much. I also have to take the loop, the end, and figure that out. So the end is kind of the whole crux of the problem, really. Yeah, if I could calculate end, it would just be a matter of subtracting end out, but I don't know how to calculate end either. So end is basically where I know the... I need to know one more thing about the loop that I didn't used to know, which is data, which is the position of data. Absolute position. Alright, so to calculate that won't be too bad. It's just a matter of when I do this. I think it's just this. Yeah, that's right. So there's your absolute position, and then later down here I set data to end. Or I subtract out... Okay, so if this happens, then loop's absolute position is just a matter of subtracting away this. But then in this case, this becomes... this equals 0. And really what that means is that data is just a matter of taking end plus the absolute position in all cases. Up there and down here. And this should just be... Wait, what is... Yeah, okay, that's right. So what I really want here is... This is all a lie. None of this is right, is it? What I need is like a base. End is not what I want. What I need is a base right there. So end is where I want to end. Data is where I am, and I need another pointer for base? I guess so. Now why am I storing end? I think the only point of end is for this spot here. I think we could do without end, actually, which would make me happy. So we're going to try to get rid of that. Yeah, okay, so if loop data equals base plus... Well, I do have to store somewhere where I'm trying to end, though. Ah! No, I do need end. It's a lot more complicated than the forward loop. Something isn't feel right there, but I think that I mean, it's correct. I just think that's not as good as it could be. But I'm going to leave it for now. So the absolute position in the file is where this data chunk starts. And then if I take that data chunk and I subtract that absolute position, then it's all set up to line up to those positions correctly. And then what I can do is say, actually this is where it needs to match down here what's happening. So minus position at the very beginning, plus position at the very end. Don't give me that. There we go. And then the loop that goes something like, while position is greater than 0, and we're looking at white space, subtract the position. And then when you get done with that loop, if the reason you ended that should be while position is greater than end. If the reason you ended was that you got out of the white space, then you want to break out of this whole loop and continue down here with this one, which still has the end and the data set up the same way, but which does not do that. Now it'll keep going back until okay, so the only problem with this scheme is I still need to say how to get out of this loop, which is like up here. If position is less than size. If position reaches size, this outer loop ends. So what I need is I need to check, like I did up here, if we want to break out for the other reason. And the same thing down here. Alright, so it's certainly not as easy. Liquid Dice, when do you think you'll start using the editor code itself? I use the editor code itself when it's in a stable state where I'm not like totally destroying all of its functionality for the sake of experiments and stuff. So like before this I was using it once in a while to code itself, and I've done like other things in it, like I do homework assignments in 4coder and stuff. It's just at the moment I can't do anything in 4coder because I've gone ahead and broken everything for the sake of this experiment. But when I'm going to start using it full time is probably sometime next year, once I have a version that is stable, that I don't like, that I keep saved, that I don't compile over. Because really what I need is a version that is a separate copy that is good enough for me to use all the time, and that is not in the directory that I compile over it and sometimes break it, right? Which will probably be sometime in the first few months of next year. Alright, let's see if I can still seek to the right and to the left. I can't seek left, but seeking right is pretty much working, although not really. I'm not sure if it's what it's. I'm not sure what that is doing. Like, that's not seeking to the white space totally. Like, it's stopping on other things too. It stops on the not white space and then on the white space. You see that? Like, there it seeks to white space, now it seeks to the not white space, then it seeks to the next white space, then it seeks to the next not white space. So I want to walk through that. If I walk through it, I'll probably be able to see what it's doing wrong, and then we'll take a look at the left, which is even farther from being correct. Where is the golden array? There we go. Seek white space right. There it is. Okay, let's take a look. I click right. Wait, I click. Let me get into a white space section. I click Control right, And what happens? I'd like to keep a look at loop.data and see what it's talking about. Okay. And I'd like to keep a look at the local version of data plus position once we get there. Okay. So the loop is still good. It updates end to there, which should be the size. Wait, no, it should be the size of the buffer. There we go. The position, there we go. Data. Okay. So that is adding up as I would expect. And so when I check, I'm checking a new line that is white space. So the loop continues all the way up until P, and then it got out because the loop it's not white space, and it says, oh, that's not white space, breakout. Is the loop still good? Should say yes. Updates end in data, but those shouldn't actually change at all. Oh! Isn't position different? Ah, that's the trick. So I actually need to store the offset that I used here in order to reuse it down here, I think. Because I haven't actually redone the fetch. So the position is no longer where it started, right? Which is interesting. And in general, relying on that position for that is probably not great. What I probably want to be able to do is say that there's a absolute position in this one too. Actually, absolute position. There we go. There we go. Get out. Give me golden array. There we go. Stringify loop. Oh, there we go. Alright, so this is starting to make a little more sense why I have absolute position in the other one, and it's the same reason why I have it here. So the data here, the absolute position is a little simpler. The absolute position starts as the start, and yada yada yada. And then every time I do that, I'm taking the absolute position and I'm incrementing this by this. If I recompute the size, as that, I think that should stay the way it is, and if that goes over the page size, then we just shrink the size back down, otherwise the size will be correct. And then all I have to do to compute the data at each step is this increment. Now I wonder if I do need that base down here. Let me take another look. Maybe if I was okay with incrementing here, I wouldn't need base. Where do I use base? Use base there, which could just be data. And I use base down here. Yeah, okay, so base is what made me feel uneasy, and now it can go. That's why I was uneasy, because that is actually not helpful. And if I just accept the fact that I do update both of these, like so, and then right here, like so. Okay. Okay, so I seek to the right, and I see that, there we go, we're right there. I'm not on white space, so it skips this part, and then it goes and says, alright, here's where we are. And that's why it was working the other ways, because that wasn't getting off. And then It moves that forward to the new line, and then it says, oh, this is white space, let's get out, and it returns that position. Great. Now if I seek white space again, what happens? Now we're on white space. Do I end on white space the second time I seek? I begin a loop. My loop is good. Okay. Now I skip forward to that star if everything works correctly. And okay. Now if everything works correctly, that stays where it was. Good. And then I continue and I say that's not white space, but the next thing is, so I skip to that, that's white space, we get out, and position is 5. Everything looks like it works now. Aha. Now, why does seeking left not work is the next question. So let's try it. Seek left. Okay, so at least gets and tries to seek left. We decrease the position by 1, which is fine. We begin. Loop data should be right now, but it's not. It's nuts. Okay. That's weird. Let me walk through that again. What is the backify loop doing? Oh, shoot. 85. Okay. So my backify stream is not correct yet, but that's okay, because I just haven't swapped end and start, since end is actually less than start in this case. Right, left. We step back 1, we get our thing, there we go, there's the whole loop data, which starts at the very beginning of the file now, so that might not be a helpful thing to look at, but then we get a look at this, which tells us where we actually are. Which is interesting. And this should seek backwards until it finds that we are in white space. Until we are not in white space. So that happens right away, apparently. Which maybe was right, I'm not sure. No, wait, we did a minus position, so we were there, but the first thing you do is you back up 1 in this algorithm, apparently. And then you check if the loop is good, everything is the same. And now we keep going until we aren't in white space. While we aren't in white space. Now we are in white space, we're done, we get out, increment forward 1. Not sure that that is right. Then again, it's not the most horrible behavior ever, but I would kind of prefer that it goes into the white space and stops at white space, not whatever it's doing. That's what this one was doing, though, is backing up 1, then moving backwards from there. Now, I think the reason was it was always starting in white space, so what happens if you're not in white space to begin with, though? No, I just think that doesn't make any sense. I don't know how that worked, but I'm gonna say that I don't get it now, and I think these shouldn't be here. Yeah, that's right. That's what I want it to be like. Okay, so seeking works for the golden array. and it's all happening through the streaming interface. So now what I want to do is take all of the code for seeking and put it into a shared file, but not the other shared file, which is like the forward shared file. This is like it's not so much shared as it's like abstract, because it uses the interface of the buffer that is shared between all buffers. It's a 4coder, that should be buffer shared, and then there should be a I'm gonna call it buffer abstract. What the hell? Okay, so these right here are a little interesting because they use the stream interface, which is just going to be an override. Now I can try switching. Well, first I need to go to the file view and include this. Buffer abstract. Alright. So that should be fine, because I've just moved the functions to a different place, and it's compiling still, so it shouldn't be different. So let's try switching over to the gap buffer, where I should get an error for that. Yes. Now, the interesting thing here is what I'm going to do about that. And I think what I'm going to do is going to be so cheesy, it's going to be awesome. Ta-da! Now it's going to start complaining to me that buffer stringify stuff doesn't work that way. And my response is going to be cat buffer type. And up here I have to have a quick cat AB, cat AB, cat AB, a cat B. paste those guys together. And then I want to do buffer type with stringify loop and backify type. Okay, so I have buffer stringify type, buffer backify type. Size is not a member of buffer, because I'm using a gap buffer now. Very well done. Now, let me pop this up here and say, look, if Connor Rents, how long do you plan on going today? Well, let me see. I plan on going in for like 6 hours straight. I'm about 3 hours into it, so I have 3 more. I could go longer. I have snacks ready to go. I'm just going for it. Life is short, so you have to spend your time programming, you know? If buffer experiment scalpel, and if, so there we go. Now we have the ability to switch between using a buffer and a gap buffer there. This is kind of interesting. It's like proto-template in a way. Hello, Vector Academy. Alright, so to make this work, what I want to do is say we have a size variable, and what we'll do is we'll say I want to set that size to the buffer size, which is also overloaded on this buffer, and then I'll just use that size directly there. Vector Academy, I don't think so. I can type faster in Emacs than I can type in the Visual Studio Editor. And it's not like I spend like tons and tons of time. There's not like a huge benefit that I see out of the system. I don't know. I don't think it would be easier. I don't have like a particular reason. I mean, I used to do that, and I don't really know that it was any better. I certainly don't want to go back to it, because I can type faster here, and that alone is worth it. Okay, let's take a look at the gap buffer. Stringify loop. Yes, so what needs to happen there is we need to stop calling it gap buffer, blah 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 blah, and call it just buffer, blah 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 blah. Whoops, that's too far. Yeah, I don't want you, I don't want you. Stringify next, there we go. I would use an IDE. Actually, I would switch to using Visual Studio if I could put the Emacs editor here. If I knew a way of plugging in Emacs right here, I would switch to only using the IDE again. But I have a feeling that even if there was such a thing that was something similar to putting Emacs here instead of this editor, it would still like be slow sometimes and janky and weird in different ways. Although, don't tell anyone I said this, because I don't really know if it's possible, but one thing I'm planning on doing is making 4coder like hyper portable, which is to say I'm going to set up a way where you can I'm going to port it to Linux and several things like that. Yeah, Vector Academy, I do use the debugger, right? So I just have it load the exe and I step through the code. I just don't edit the code here. But the visual debugger is invaluable. And if I could put the editor here and eliminate the switching back and forth, that would be good. But this editor is bad enough that switching back and forth is worth it to me. Now that said, once 4coder is hyperportable and I figure out how to make a Visual Studio plugin, I will try to replace this with a plugin, and then I will only edit in here. Yeah, Connor has the right idea there. I think an IDE should really be sort of like an application um, docking system in a way that lets you dock applications together, and those applications might be specially programmed to say, if I'm docked, then communicate with this other application if it's also docked, and that's fine with me. But it would be able to say at any time, okay, they swapped out that, so I don't have a way of communicating with the editor that's docked in, so just don't do that right now. But an IDE as application docking system that could let you dock in anything at all in the world would be really, really cool. You know? Um, let's see. So, buffer stringify loop. Why is that not good? Identifier not found. I thought I just fixed this. Get buffer stringify loop. Yeah, it's all here. Let me rebuild. Maybe I just need to rebuild. Identifier not found. Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Let's talk about that. End equals loop.size plus absolute position. Why is that a problem? Is that a problem because there's no such thing as absolute position in this one? That's the reason. Okay, let's deal with that. So this needs to have everything that is required for matching the other one, including the absolute position. Buffer size. Okay, that's good. I don't have any backify stuff ready. Where's this gap loop? There we go. Bye-bye, gap. Alright, good. So now let's go talk to this gap buffer loop and tell it how to use the absolute position correctly. So, basically, the idea is something like this. I want to be able to, results, whoa. I want to be able to, yeah, that's right. So I figure out the end position first. Right, I have this concept of whether or not the two pieces are separated with the start and the end. And I want to know what the absolute position is, which is basically to say subtract the start amount at first, or to add it, whichever one I'm looking at, right? So the absolute position should start at start amount, And then every time it steps forward, what does it do? So if these guys are separated, it says, all right, have we concluded everything we need on the left-hand side of the gap buffer? If so, separated equals 0, position equals... Oh, what is position? Is position the absolute position? Okay, position is the buffer position. I want an absolute position, like within the contents of the file, not within the buffer's memory, not within the gap buffer. So the absolute position would be like what would happen if I didn't ask about the gap size, right? Otherwise, I would just increase the absolute position by 1 page size and call it a day. Now, alternatively, this one right here ends the loop, so I don't care about that one. But this one, the position increases by page size. So here I want to increase the absolute position by page size. But how does that work? This guy and this guy must be getting limited by the page size. Okay, so when it's doing this loop, it's going along doing this loop. Right here it says increase this by the page size, increase this by the page size, and then temp end equals size 1. Okay, so the size is calculated by saying, what if I went all the way to the end? And then of the first chunk, and how much size would I have? If that's too big, then shrink me back down. Either way, set the position to my base position plus the actual position in the buffer memory. What happens in this case? Right, the position just starts there. I'd be curious to see if this works when the end is exactly... No, because they're not separated then, right? So, if they're separated, it has to do at least one character there. Okay. If loop position plus loop size equals loop end, what happens there? What is going on there, huh? So that's if we are at we are to the point where we're done. Then we just don't care what happens because this is the end of the loop. Right, so with this one, we increase the absolute position. Okay, so we're never in a position where the absolute position needs to be altered. That won't be necessarily as easy to deal with when we're going backwards, but it's fine now. So let me go in here and take out seeking left. That way we can just test the seeking right for the gap buffer. Come on, seeking right. Nothing. It's not doing anything. Alright. But that could be because the scalpel is still removing it. So let's take a look at that real quick. Seek white space right. There it is. You are no longer under the power of the scalpel. Sorry, you are. It's somebody else who I was thinking of. There we go. You are no longer under the power of the scalpel, as I was saying. That's pretty seek whitespacey. And just so we're clear, the /R's are whitespace. Those are special characters that aren't being rendered specially. Okay, so... Oh, that's perfectly absurd. Why would control up be working? Is that not... It's not being removed? I'm guessing it's not being removed. But seek white space up. Yeah, that should be... under the scalpel. Alright, let me see. I think I need to take a quick bathroom break. Be right back. I'm going to cycle the stream real quick.